the different learning experiences that TAB teachers provide their students. And I want to talk about how the learning of children mimics what adult artists are doing. And so what you're doing in the classroom is not only consistent with how children learn, it's also consistent with understanding the art world, if we want to use Hetland's term. It is in sync, not necessarily with what artists were doing in the 1950s, but it's definitely in sync with what artists are doing in 2014. So I'm going to be showing specifically Chris Burden, so one artist, and then I'll have a few other artists that you can use that support his work or support some of the ideas in his work. I have made this PowerPoint to be very plain, it's not fancy, so that it's easily transferable, and Adam's going to figure out some way to put it on the pad, so that, or in some way, Adam's going to figure it out, he's a genius, and he's going to, oh, I'm fine, but you're going to figure out how to get the PowerPoint to them. And once you have this, feel free to add, to delete, take my name off of it, put your name on it. I would like you to be able to have something that is easily usable in the classroom so that you will use it, and then you can use my research. You've done this. I'm interested, as I walked around of hearing people's stories, every table people are talking about, oh, you know what I've done in my past, or about a specific toy, or stories are coming up. A great story at the back table. So, did you experience, even if you weren't telling a story, did you experience a memory as you were playing with toys today? It came to your mind. We've talked a lot about assessment. To me, when I'm looking at a child's artwork or if I'm looking at an adult's artwork, does the art give form to our lived experiences? If an artist, an adult artist, is making a lot of money, but they are producing the same thing over and over and over again, and people love it, and it has no connection to their life, I'm not as interested. If a child is not connecting their work to their life, I'm not sure it's real art. And you see that in a lot of classrooms that have a teacher-directed style, not all, but in many, where the artwork that the children are doing is not connected into their lives. That's what has attracted me to TAB, is because kids are giving form to their lived experiences. My colleague, who is also named Connie Berthards, this was her line in our program, art gives form to our lived experiences, and she is retired this year, so now I have to say it in every talk I give. So I channel her. How does art give form to our lived experiences? We do it, and this is like the 2-minute aesthetics lesson that's part of this talk. Sometimes it's through the act of making, it's pushing the paint around. We were talking about that in one of the sessions. Sometimes it's illustrating a story, it's drawing the story. Sometimes it's using a metaphor, and then I'm going to talk about changing the place or scale of actual objects. Can be a way that we're telling the story, we give form to our experiences, and creating microcosms. So if you think that a second grader that just wants to be at the paint station until they make mud every day maybe isn't learning anything, look at Jackson Pollock. It was the act of making. That's what he was doing, is I'm going to record the act of my making it. This is the form for my lived experience. Look at the illustration of Faith Ringgold, and then how she takes that memory into the realm of metaphor with the bridge, and I'm flying over the bridge, and I'm helping, that's my daddy's bridge that he was helping to build. Talked about metaphor, I had to throw in one of my favorite metaphors. This is a designer, Shirazeh Hushari, who is, and she's married to Pip Horn. She's from Iran, and he is from Britain. Neither one are particularly religious, and then they do this church window that just makes me cry. You know, the metaphor is so strong. Changing scale, Charles Simons. He worked in the East Village when the East Village in New York was a scary place to be, and he would go or look at buildings that were deteriorating and create these tiny little societies inside them. And he spent the rest of his career creating dwelling places for people that he calls the little people. And so he has created these in New York, Paris, Shanghai, Berlin, Dublin, London. Each dwelling is a different time and place in the history of the lives of little remarkable people. What a fun thing to show kids. Is there some place around your school that you might have children interested in creating a secret society and hiding it somewhere? Often we think about art as defined by traditional art materials, paint, clay, playing with toys as a way of thinking about what you're experiencing. It's another way of giving form to our lived experiences. We're going to talk about Chris Burden. You may know him, and maybe it didn't click in your mind right away when Donna mentioned his name. You may know the image of the guy that crucified himself to a Volkswagen, and you had to study that when you were in art history sometime a long time ago. Not too many people, good, so you don't have that preconception of Chris Burden. Oh, a few people do, okay. This is the same Chris Burden, and he's gone beyond some of the more physical extreme acts to doing the extreme acts with toys. And he has had a long career since his early notoriety with some of his performance art pieces. I don't know that I would show kids the crucified to the Volkswagen. You know, I have a little, we need to talk about violence in the art classroom. You know, to me that's kind of a little bit on the line. But some of his work that he's been doing since the 70s, I think is very appropriate for children. So, I don't like just telling about art, I like talking about art. And if anybody uses visual thinking strategies, the great question, what do you see? I don't always like to start with that question, but for me right now, this works really well. So, what do you see? So you noticed a boat right away. Where is the boat? Those would be nice literal questions that get people talking. How big do you think the boat is? Plus size. If you, and this is on the Bowery, if people are familiar with New York, where would you have to stand to be able to see that boat? So if you couldn't stand up and look at the boat, why would the artist put a boat on the outside of a building?
Maybe we change the perspective.
Change your perspective with it. Would you like it if it was, like maybe if he had created a scenario for it, like maybe a little river that ran down the sidewalk or something? That'd be better. Does it bother anybody that it's totally useless up there on the side of the building? You like it? Why do you like it totally useless up on the side of the building?
Juxtaposition.
Juxtaposition of, so it's intriguing.
Yeah.
There's two different things you wouldn't expect.
I love it.
Yeah.
But you can still use it. Yeah.
How can you use it?
Well, you can take it down.
You can take it down.
You can imagine.
Yeah.
You can live on it.
Peter Pan. Ooh, what a great, that almost metaphor there. Of like maybe where is that boat sailing through the sky? Monty Python.
Yeah,
Okay, Monty Python. Why Monty Python?
because the industry, they pirated the corporations and turned their building into a ship to go to America
Yeah,
to ransack
that's
the
right.
economy.
Yeah, I love this. This is great. And I always love talking to kids because there's so many images from popular culture. I think that our images used to be from nature that kids drew on, and now they're from popular culture, and we play on that. That's our lives. Would you enjoy this artwork more if you knew that the boat was real? Or is it not, does it matter to you if it's real or not? If it can function? Does it need to function? It's there either way. It actually is a real boat. And it was designed to be remote controlled. And so the original idea, and we were talking about failure. I mean, Chris Burden failed with his original idea, and he failed over and over. Originally, this idea was he was going to create a fleet of boats, and they were going to be remote controlled and go across the Atlantic from the US to Europe. It never happened, and they tried in several different ways. They finally got this boat to work as a remote controlled boat, and they sailed at 400 miles and ended up, it was built in Fair Island, Scotland, and they brought it to Newcastle, if you've been in England. And they brought it in with the Tall Ships Festival, so that they considered them their success. So one of those questions, is that a success if it went 400 miles versus across the ocean? Is it a success or failure? You have to assess it, A, B, C, D. You know, the purpose has changed with that.
It's a happy failure.
A happy failure, it ended up working.
It's a spin.
I would say persistence.
Persistence, you know, it's right there. It didn't work, they kept on working until they got something.
It just depends what questions we have.
Yeah, what questions? Through the process, what was the process like? I'm sure the depth of knowledge was pretty high. So he has this boat, and he decided when he was asked to do a retrospective at the new museum to put it on the side of the museum. And then it's not just the artist, it's the collaboration with all the curators at the museum. So here's a little bit of a video of them getting it up there. He says, the curator says, Chris wanted the ship to be rigged as if it was ready to sail. In all my experience in the museum, I've never had to sail a ship, so he had to hire somebody. Further complicating matter, due to the size of the crane we were using, we had to shut down the northbound lanes of the Bowery and do all of our work between midnight and 6 a.m. So we not only had to find a maritime rigger, but also one who could come out at 1 a.m. It's not every day you have to rig a ship in the middle of the night. So they're actually getting it up here. Artists sometimes do extreme things. Is this one a good use of personal and cultural resources? The city had to be involved. They had to hire experts from different fields. They had to work in the middle of the night. It cost a lot of money to put this shut on the side of the building. Was it a waste? People are saying no. Why not? That's a really good question. Why do you think he wanted? Do you think it'd be just as effective inside? Outside? Someplace cheaper?
Shock over there. So unexpected.
The shock, the extremeness of it.
It's an art culture.
That's a good point. Just because it's extreme, you can do something pretty wild and it's not valuable. It's pardon? It's humorous. It adds more. Yeah.
I like the idea that you can see it as a passerby, you know, that people go to the museum when you have to have that many people work together, the experience is something that's also shared, and that becomes part of the artwork itself. It becomes a collaborative piece instead of something that's just individual. It makes that connection with the city itself.
We were just looking at Christo's Gates in Central Park
Yeah,
with my students.
good example.
They were like,
Is the museum close to the shore?
You know, it is in Colorado terms if you look at miles, but in New York terms, when everything is in blocks, it's a long ways.
A long ways.
And
It just seems to me that this extreme measure for one man's vision, to me seems a little, it's a lot of risk, and I would love to see an extreme measures where a collective actually all made the decisions together. So it gets to me a little bit in that sense, but I still think it's a beautiful, amazing, cool, I can see it.
Is it, just for a certain length of time, is it temporary?
it is temporary. Yeah, it'll come down.
How temporary?
I think that this part is still up, but it's going down within a week or so, and it's been up several months.
So does it relate to something that's currently exhibiting inside the museum?
The whole inside of the museum is a retrospective of his work. So it's a lifelong retrospective, so it's got all of his stuff. He also tried to make the point that it was connected to Sandy, to Hurricane Sandy. Does that help you understand it? And to me, it was like he's trying to force the point. He just wants to show off his work. But it might, that idea, and is the water level going to be that high at some point? Are we going under?
Do you think it's a metaphor for his journey he had to take to get where he was? Even though, he's been an artist for a really long time, it was still a huge journey for him to get to that point. And with the whole boat thing not working out right.
I love that idea. And what would that be a metaphor for you in your journey? If you had to put something up high that would be a metaphor for your struggles in life, where would that be? I love these kinds of conversations. And you can have them with high schoolers, you can have them with elementary. I started this off by saying, is this a good use of personal and cultural resources? If I was working with elementary, I would say, is putting a full-size ship on the outside of a building a waste of time? So, same question, just a little bit different vocabulary. His original idea, again this might have been a failure, is he had designs for his whole retrospective to be on the outside of the building. And the museum would shut down the Bowery, they would hire whoever they had to hire, they would reinforce the inside, you'll see all the different things they did inside. They would not hold the whole retrospective on the outside. Any idea why?
Too much liability cost.
Liability, and this is an answer where I actually...
Yeah, you wouldn't need to go into the museum.
Exactly, isn't that interesting? You wouldn't have to buy a ticket. How are they going to get their money back? And so they'll spend all this money, except when he wanted it all on the outside, it was like, and then they just said, no, structurally we can't do it.
I mean, you were saying that it may be a good thing that people don't know the rest of the context of his work, but knowing the rest of the context of his work, I'm like, this guy's an egomaniac.
Yeah. And is that going to make a difference if you have that opinion? Is that going to stop you from having a personal connection with the work, even though you don't like him? But then you might be able to find a metaphor that could meet your needs. I don't like Picasso either. And I don't like Gauguin. They were both really creepy men. They didn't treat the women in their lives very well. But we sure use them in the classroom all the time. Think about it. Is there a toy that you could put in an unusual place that would respond to a current social issue? So let's say he was responding to Sandy. I was interested in what Anne was doing with the little tiny figures and putting those downtown, and maybe she can talk about that tomorrow. So is that something you could do in your classroom? Is there something that the kids in your school are talking about, that they could respond by simply placing something out of place. Is there a structure? He really wanted to challenge the whole idea of the museum structure. Why do I have to have my work inside the museum? So is there a structure or an institution that the students in your classroom might be interested in challenging? Would that be a project to work on? What would that be? Would it be something to do with the lunchroom? Would it be something to do with unemployment? Would it be something to do with war? Would it be something, what are they interested in outside of their own personal lives and outside of your classroom that they might be able to respond to, challenge through their work? So artists create microcosms. One of the ways Chris Burden has responded to the world around him is by creating elaborate microcosms with toys. And this is called Metropolis. He has Metropolis 1, Metropolis 2. Metropolis 1 went to Japan, and it's in storage, so that kind of ticked him off. And so he made it again, Metropolis 2, that's in LA, and it is being shown. This is made of two 1/12 horsepower motors with controllers, 4 electric transformers, wood, plastic, aluminum, magnet, cement, glue, Legos, Lincoln Logs, fired clay bricks, Hot Wheels, cars, track, monorail trails, and track.
Yeah, it's getting real close to getting finished.
How do you feel when you look at it running?
Great. I love hearing that the cars are going 230 miles an hour. And it's going to be very helpful for the future. That's about the speed they should be running. Not 23.4 miles an hour, which is what my BMW says I average driving around LA. About to be over. The idea that a car runs free, that those days are about to close. So it's a little bit like making a model in New York City at the turn of the last century, and you're modeling horse buggies everywhere, and then automobiles about to arrive. So something else is about to arrive. What's really stressful is that stop and go, low speed, high speed, where it speeds up and slows down. That is highly stressful. I mean, it's different than cruising along on an open road, you know what I'm saying, at a constant speed. The noise is real amazing, I think, in terms of how it produces a level of tension, too.
This whole thing will be in the PowerPoint if you look at it. I'm calling these microcosms because he's taking a whole big, huge city and putting it down to 7 by 10 feet. So, microcosm. But is it an illustration? Is he replicating the city? No, why not? What's different?
Well, the levels for water different.
The levels are different. Katie, what?
Yes, I was saying the levels.
Yeah. So he's creating something else. What's it saying about a big city?
The cars rule the design of the city. The automobile rules the design.
Have you thought about that? What's the role of cars in our life?
What's the name of the famous musician who, Philip Glass,
Oh,
has used this idea too, the car, lights.
right. Wouldn't that would be a really interesting thing if you were showing kids to play a little bit of Philip Glass and talk about cars. I think about New York because my daughter lives in the East Village and has 2 very young children, 5-month-old. And it just was really, really cold there. And I was like, I'm the grandma. Like, how'd you keep your kids warm? And she's mad at me. You know, we bundled them up. But they don't have cars. So they're out in the weather so much more than I am because I get in my car in the garage and I go to work and I walk across the parking lot and that's it. So, you know, thinking about what cars mean to us and how that does dictate our lives and how our lives would be different without a car. Great conversation to have with kids. But what it's come from is reducing something big into something small so we can talk about it. I'm not showing Chris Burden so that everybody can go out and do 7-layer structures in your classrooms. I'm looking at the purposes of adult artists and how does that connect with what kids are doing. You give kids toys, they're going to start creating something. They're taking the big world around them and they're making it small so they can learn to understand it. And they're doing that naturally. Maybe then the writing portion is how they put that into more academic terms so that it fits within the school day. Something else that Burden does, maybe this is his egomania, but he becomes fascinated with one idea and he repeats it over and over and over. So, did any of you do that when you were playing with toys? Did you just like fixate on something and keep on working with it? You're saying yes. What was it? Can you?
Barbies.
Barbies. It was just like
houses for them.
over and over and over and over again. Were you having memories as you were playing with toys now about playing with Barbies before?
No, not that. It was more Legos.
Mm.
Some of the version too.
Legos and Barbies both. Did you, when you were playing, did you ever have a memory where you were thinking about what something smelled like? So how did those stories develop? Were they sensory as you played with toys? If you played longer, would have gone into sensory memories. You know, it's kind of interesting as we start to examine our memories and what triggers memories. Chris Burden's father was an engineer, and he has become fascinated with bridges. So, any idea, bridge? Would that be something you'd be fascinated with? If you'd want to make it over and over and over again? That would be a great K1, 2, 3 question. And I don't know why he's so fascinated with him. I'm sure it has something to do with his past. For me, a bridge becomes a metaphor. I don't know if it's a metaphor for him. So here are 3 bridges. You can barely see the third one in the back, but the one in the middle is all hand-cast concrete bricks, and it's put together so it's stacked without mortar. So each time that it's shown in the museum, it has to be restacked. So they have to bring it in, and then they have to balance it exactly so that it will be stable as people go through the museum. The one that has wood post and then metal inside is all made of erector sets, and it was a replica of a bridge that was designed for a Mexican railroad to transverse a gorge, and it was never built. So he studies bridges from the past, from now, and then he looks at them in detail on how they were constructed and figures out how to replicate them with a whole team of adults working on it. Here's one he got a commission to do one over the Tyne River, And so he completed this bridge, and here's the real one. And then now when he shows it, he shows all of the toy parts that went into building it with the image of what it looked like when he showed it. And when the first time he showed it, it actually looked out on the real bridge.
So is he always there to construct it, or does he just give instructions to the installers?
Ooh, good. I don't know. I from what he talks about, I assume he's there. You know, and he's hired people, but I don't know if he's always there or not. I don't want that yet. Let's go. Here's a quote that he says, and I think it's interesting. I think toys are important because they're an indoctrinational tool, a box of what is to be in society. I think we kind of talked about that. My bridges are the promise of a toy fulfilled. The early construction sets, Legos or Erectosets, always were miniature models that you as a child could build. Maybe you could make something as grand as the engineering feat you saw around you, but I don't think that promise was ever fulfilled. A child couldn't make these bridges. Even my sophisticated builders can barely do it. So it's almost like he's making these things to fulfill some child frustration with toys. Can you relate to that?
Building's fun.
It is fun.
I don't know. What do you like at bridges?
Do kids ever get frustrated in their classroom because it doesn't work? To me, that's what, well, here's Chris Burden. He got frustrated, and when he grew up, he hired people to do it right. You know, you can too. You know, that's part of being a kid. But I would love to ask kids, is it hard to be a kid? It was hard for me. You know, we have this stereotype that childhood is idyllic. It's hard to be a kid.
Well, the part of this that I really think of in having children right now, that part of the indoctrination kind of thing is really speaks out most to me out of that whole area. Just, you know, even the toys, you know, we've got the half meal toys that are the indoctrination to make sure the kid watches the movie. It's just another cycle of let's, you know, market and consumer as a child.
Yeah, are you guys concerned about that? And is that something we can subvert in some way? You know, maybe you could talk about that, and maybe we put those things in different places, you know, and we talk about how people are trying to sell us things through our toys. The next slide does not have anything to do with Chris Burden, so I kind of put a blank slide so you can kind of know. But I wanted to put in a plug for a Colorado organization that I became familiar with last summer as I was doing the Center for Integrated Arts Education Institute. This is Bridges to Prosperity. It is a Denver company. It was started by an artist that went on to then get architectural training, structural engineer. She's a structural engineer. And she has a nonprofit that builds bridges all over the world that provide access to healthcare and school for people that for some part of the year would not be able to get to healthcare or school because there's a ravine that they can't cross over. So I think it's a really interesting nonprofit, and you can check her out on Facebook and on her website. So I put that in and just give a little plug. Back to toys. Artists use toys to show what can't usually be seen. And I want to know Donna's story about installing this. Is it a short story or is it a long story? Long story. Okay, we're going to have to get Donna later. It's what? A glass of wine and tell us a story. That's another interesting thing about how artists come up with ideas and people that work in museums have to fulfill them. We were talking about collaboration, cooperation. How does that happen in your classroom? Somebody comes up with the other idea. Does somebody else do it? Is that fair? So this is a miniaturization, a microcosm of all the submarines of the United States when he made it in 1987. So there were 625 miniature cardboard submarines, and each submarine is an exact replica of something in the U.S. fleet. It looks like a school of fish. Somebody else said something else I didn't hear.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not married to him.
Okay, I can agree. I wonder if he's married or how many times. Is the message with the submarine the same as it is with bridges? Is there a different message he's trying to convey? So the bridges could be a metaphor. It talks about a childhood interest. Abby?
It's one of those things where, I mean, I'm sure his intent is different. How much different, without knowing his intent, do I bring this? Then that's the difference, I think, until you know someone's intent, you're only bringing yourself to the artwork. So I can bring some very similar things to the bridges. I'm not gonna bring the same thing to the bridges that I'm gonna bring to this, because I know the story about the bridges. And to me, that puts a whole new light on those bridges. Whereas this, I don't know anything about, and so I'm projecting so much of me on it that I have no concept of where he's at, other than you must be really meticulous at some level. This says to me, I have OCD.
Is there a place for OCD in our lives? A lot of ours do.
I just say formally, I just thought about this one versus the boat being on the side of the building, and say this, but the building wasn't straight. It was like askew.
Right.
It was moving, and so there was something about the boat being on the side of the building that was moving, and there's this actual physical motion that goes through the boat. It's really intriguing forward.
It's the density of it. How many of you seen a submarine? How many of you have seen 625 of them? So all of a sudden we're seeing something you'd never really see. And then they're hanging.
This reminds me very much of the, is it 1,000 or 2,000 planes?
Yeah.
That's the first thing we got.
And that's almost like an image of healing. Is this an image of healing?
It's so graceful and beautiful, though, I think, and it's wild. There's, again, that juxtaposition of a military submarine and how disgustingly huge the fleet is and everything, But it's really quite airy and beautiful.
I wonder, does it respond to any of the air currents in the room? Does it move?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And I'm really interested in Abby's comment. It's really a modernist, postmodernist debate, whether we interpret a work with the intention of the artist or whether we allow ourselves to come with multiple interpretations. What if we interpret it differently than the artist did? That would be a more of a postmodern theory, that's fine.
That comes up with kids.
Yeah.
I never really understood that well enough. Like, what, did you say that?
In modernism, so like up until whenever postmodernism started, Warhol, it was a good, the work was interpreted in light of an artist's life and intentions. And now it's like the interpretation has become dispersed, where the work of art, the value of interpretation is the viewer. And so there can be multiple interpretations that may be very different than what the artist intended, that are correct, because they're yours.
So that idea that an artwork is not completed until it's published is a postmodern idea?
Well, I don't know. I've got a lot of stuff in my closet. But I think the idea that it could be approached in multiple ways is a postmodern idea.
In many ways, kids are really much more postmodern than they are modernists. Wouldn't you say?
I would, and that's been my soapbox, is we're preparing our children for the 1950s, and they aren't going to live there. We have children in the postmodern world that need to be prepared for the postmodern world. So by focusing on form exclusively, divorcing it from meaning,
Oh, I see what
we're preparing them to be excellent artists for the past. That's my opinion. You can take that or leave it.
I think that's true. I mean, I try to be more contemporary, but
Artists use toys to express opinions. He has done A Tale of Two Cities. If if the submarines were hard, I can't imagine how hard this is to install. It's 2 miniature cities, approximately 5,000 toys, I think it's 20,000 pounds of sand, plants, live plants that you have to keep alive for the months that this is up, boulders. The whole thing weighs approximately 53,000 pounds. Once you can only view everything through the binoculars, you know, so then you can look and see the different parts of it. It's 2 cities with a desert environment, 1980s, but it's definitely talking about war in the Middle East. But you don't, I mean, that would be one interpretation. I mean, you can look at it now. Here's some close-ups. Yeah, I mean, would you?
Yeah.
Wow. My son would totally do this. If he was allowed to keep something this elaborate up, he would totally do this.
Can everybody hear that? She's just saying her son would so do this. A corner of the classroom. Club.
That's what we did as kids. We were, you know, reenacting World War II
Right.
situations. Living, building, you know, bunkers and reinforced battle zones, and then reenacting the battle.
And that's what he's doing. Well, I saw this with my daughter and my 3-year-old grandson, and my first thought, because I need to talk to you more, I have issues with violence in children. And I said, I'm not sure this is appropriate for kids as much as he was engaged in it because of all the toys and the Legos and the Transformers. And my daughter said, of course it is. Look at how he plays. There's good guys and bad guys. And he's 3. So that's my question. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? How do you decide? When I looked at it, it was, again, this whole world that all of a sudden I was getting an overview I'd never be able to see in real life, just like the submarines. And I was impressed with the amount of space and time and energy and resources that went into military protection. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't see that in our world, but I bet that those proportions are correct.
There's on NPR, the Minnesota Public Radio Station.
Mm-hmm.
This past week, I can't think of who it was. It was an artist that they were interviewing, and she was saying that she, and not in a mental illness kind of way. She was just being straightforward and saying that the boundary between reality and non-reality was pretty blurred for her most of the time.
Mm.
When I'm looking at these, and you know, your little boys with Transformers and all the video games they have, I mean, that's exactly that popped into my mind as I'm driving home.
Mm-hmm.
That you know, my conception of reality is very different than the reality of the children that I teach.
It's a really interesting point. And, you know, is that okay? That, you know, putting Transformers in with Army Men, you know? So microcosms can help us tell our own stories and share our opinions as we show the world an overview we can never physically experience. Is that what we're helping kids do as we allow them to play with toys in the classroom? So I went with my family to this. We came back to the very tiny East Village apartment that my daughter and son-in-law live in, and here's my grandson that wants to recreate what he just saw. I think the funniest part, I don't know if you can hear this, is my son-in-law's response. I don't know if you can hear Scott's going, oh my God. So we actually stopped that because, you know, Dad was having trouble. But then we came to Grandma's house, and we can do anything we want at Grandma's house. And so we got out all the toys, many of which have you been playing with. And first of all, he just played with them. And then we started building a construction site. And then he started sorting them. And then I made a mistake because I picked up a car and put it in one place, and he goes, no, Nani, that's damaged. That needs to be where the monster trucks can drive over it. And so all of a sudden he's building in his mind this environment, most of which he's never really experienced. I don't know that he's ever really seen a monster truck drive over other cars, except in the media. But he is he's expressing to me his lived experience. And so for me, this in the toy room was a valuable art experience. It met my criteria. What's my question? Does the art experience give form to your lived experiences? And this is Jersikele. In play, children create manageable models of the world so they can make modifications and restructure what exists. So I hope that you think about using alternative materials in your classrooms and think about how contemporary artists are doing the same thing. Feel free to take this and use it however you like, and it's been a pleasure working with you today. I appreciate it.